All right. Mic check. I'm good. So I'm Max Duran. CWB Association Welding podcast. Today we have a really cool guest. Welding podcast.
The show is about to begin.
Hello and welcome to another special edition of the CWB Association podcast. This is in collaboration with Skills Canada, and I have had the privilege of interviewing a number of fantastic people across this wonderful country. And today I have Allison Wragg from Newfoundland coming to us to talk to us about her journey through the skills pathway in the world of photography. Allie, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Max?
I'm doing really good. I'm not going to lie. It's my Friday. I have Thursday and Friday off.
That's nice.
It is.
Jealous.
I'm pumped. So give us a little information about home base. Where are you sitting right now?
Right now I'm sitting in my bedroom in Newfoundland, Canada. So I live in the province of Newfoundland, St. John's. So we're the capital, and yeah.
And are you a native Newfoundlander? Were you born and raised in St. John's, or were you from somewhere else?
No, born and raised St. John's, Newfoundland. Haven't moved very far.
No.
I enjoy it.
So tell me, as an outsider, I've been to Newfoundland once, quickly, and I hope to spend more time there. What's one of your favorite things about Newfoundland?
Oh, Newfoundland is gorgeous. If you've ever had the opportunity to be here, I mean, I no offense, you're in Winnipeg, is it? Or where
I'm
are
in
you
Regina.
situated?
I'm in Regina.
Regina, right. Newfoundland has some beautiful, gorgeous coastlines that you're not getting anywhere else. I'm a big fan of the outdoors, hiking, all of that kind of stuff. So once it hits summer and it's not so gloomy and miserable outside like it is right now, the coastal hiking trails are pretty wicked.
And I've spent some time in the Maritimes, and one of the things that I know about out there is that the winters are kind of crazy with the snow and the wind and all that. And how's that where you live? Is it bad or not too bad?
We just had a snowstorm a few days ago. For the record, it's like late March at this point, so we're kind of buried once again, which is annoying, but we're beating through it. I find that most people say it's a different kind of cold when you compare being on the water versus being in mainland Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So some people, I've been to Montreal, Toronto before in the winter, and I find it freezing, but then other people will come here and say, no, the like wet cold is worse, but I don't know. Anyways, the snowstorm has really thrown me off. I can't wait for spring.
I think every Canadian can relate to that right now. We're all just waiting for sunshine. I think I get +2 today in Regina. I'm pumped for some +2 weather.
Yeah, really. It's a treat once you get into the pocket.
All right, Allie. So let's talk a little bit about you growing up in St. John's, Newfoundland. You ended up competing in skills in photography, but tell us a little bit about the bug that got you. How old were you when you realized that the visual arts, or even photography specifically, was something that you loved or that attracted you?
Yeah, so I've always been into the kind of visual arts side of things since I was a kid. It's always been an interest of mine between like drawing and crafts and all of that sort of stuff. But it wasn't me who started photography first in my family. It was actually my dad. And it's kind of a funny story of how it got started, that it all goes back to me playing soccer when I was about 7. And he used to be one of those really obnoxious parents that would sit at the sidelines and scream and yell. And I was like, I'm 7 years old. I don't need this. And there was one day that I don't know, I guess 7-year-old me had enough of it. So I ran over to him while he sat with a bunch of the other soccer moms. And I just went, Dad, shut up. And he got so embarrassed. And that day he said, you know what? Next time I come, I'm just going to bring a camera. It's something to entertain myself. So yeah, that's actually how he got started into photography. Me telling him to shut up at a soccer game. And he's been interested in it ever since. He has his own, it's not his full-time job, but it's something he does part-time here. And yeah, so it's something he's always been really into. So when I hit about grade 7, he started a photography club at my junior high school. So that's really where I started to kind of take photography and start learning it. And yeah, it kind of took off from there.
Now, in today's world, photography can have a lot of different angles than it did in the past. Photography is also a different level of accessibility for people. And I'm going to date
That's like,
myself because I went to high school a long time ago and I took photography in high school and I loved it. But we were learning to develop film. Like we would develop film, we would take negatives, blow them out, contrast them, you know, soak them, hang them, the whole deal in the dark room. We made our first pinhole cameras just with like stock film in a coffee can, and they took beautiful pictures. We learned lots. But that back then, to be a photographer, it was a huge investment of time and money and space,
absolutely.
right? And now it's different.
Well, I can beg to differ on the investment side of
Well,
things.
yes.
Photography is still a very expensive hobby to be into. But no, I definitely agree. I mean, I would call myself a photographer, but I have never touched film. That's not something I've ever done. I've grown up in the age that you have a digital camera, and that's what you have. You have infinite shots. There's no,
Running out.
being precise. Yeah, that's actually an activity that we know Newfoundland doesn't have the same education system as some other provinces have. So I would have never had the opportunity to take a formal photography class. It's just been a, mix of self-taught and from my dad who's done it and like the very small photography club we had. But I remember that being one of the activities that we would actually do was that, hey, none of us have ever touched film and we, don't have the money as a club to bring in a film camera or bring in rolls of film or get them shipped off somewhere. That was too much.
Mm-hmm.
But what we would do was do a limited photo challenge where you really had to plan your shots instead of, now that we're in this digital age of photography, a lot of people, myself included, just have the tendency to try a ton of different things before, getting the shot that I want. So I'll play with the exposure, I'll play with the ISO, the aperture, the shutter speed. I'll play with all of these different aspects to get the shot that I want without having to pre-plan it, because I can play with it. I can take 100 pictures if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of the activities that we used to do, was to say, think about the shot that you want and pre-plan it. So pre-plan all of your settings, because imagine if you had a film camera and that's
it.
You only have a limited number.
Mm-hmm.
It gets expensive if you take 100 shots, so you can't be doing that.
Mm-hmm. Now,
So,
as a young girl, your dad comes into your school, grade 7, says, "I want to start up a photography club." What was the appetite for that? Was it just you and your dad hanging out for a little while, or did quite a few people sign up? And what were some of the objectives or the motto or the vision of this club?
yeah, it's actually kind of funny now that I'm digging back into it. I remember the very first day he hosted photography club, I showed up and he was shocked that I was there. So what are you doing here? Like, what do you mean? What am I doing here? You're hosting a club at my school. I feel like it's like, I don't know, my responsibility as a daughter to attend. And at that point, it was very small. I think our first iteration of it only had about 5 members.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't huge by any stretch. But as it went on and, he continued to get into the groove. Now, this is something he had never taught anything before. So I think the very first iteration of the club, I remember having to tell him and be like, listen, I know this is what you know of photography, because he knows all of the settings and the nitty gritty and everything. But I was like, even in grade 7, I was like, you can't lecture like that. I was like, nobody's going to listen. So he started, I think as time went on, everybody learned how the best way to do it was. So he started bringing in chocolates and stuff. And it was, if you raised your hand and answered a question, here you go, I'm throwing a Kit Kat at you or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it became less of a lecture-based thing and more of I recognize you're all in grade 7 and a lot of you are shooting with iPhones right now. So I'm going to teach you more of the basics of composition and do activities that you can do with your phones to kind of foster that love of photography and hopefully kind of get you interested, and then we'll continue to expand from there. So I think honestly it was a learning curve for him. Now, I don't want to speak for him, but I think it was definitely something that we both learned along the way. What was the best way to keep people engaged?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was definitely interesting. He didn't expect me to be there, but I was, and that's where it all started.
And Was this only for grade sevens, or could anyone in the school join? Was there grade eights and 12s or adults even as part of the club, or did it grow into something like that?
No, it was only our junior high school, so we would have had about 700 kids in our junior high, maybe. I might be overshooting there. I can't exactly remember. It feels like a long time. But it was open to grade 7, 8s, and 9s. So anyone who was in the school at the time. So we would have had him, a teacher, liaison, whatever you would call her, and then 5 students that were interested. But I think by the time I left, like I don't want to say graduated because I would have only been in grade 9. But by the time I left that school, I think it was about 20 members, and it just kind of kept going from there.
Okay. And so then you leave junior high and you leave the photo club behind you. How did you maintain the connection with photography?
Well, at this point, I had already been competing in Skills Canada because
Okay.
one of my favorite parts about Newfoundland is that we're actually the only province out of Canada that I know of that offers the intermediate level of competitions. So when I first started competing nationally, I would have been the youngest in my competition by far, considering that, I was still in junior high and I was going up against all high school kids.
Mhm.
But once I moved out of junior high, I actually went on and started my own photography club in my high school. So he was still doing the junior high level, which was then kind of feeding into my photography club, which I hosted
Mhm.
at high school level.
Now it's tricky because how do you teach when you haven't had a formal teacher? Your father, did he take some formal photography classes and learn, the real gritty technical stuff and then pass it on to you, which then you ran with? Or was this all self-taught? Is this all YouTube? Is this all online? Where did it come from?
I think one of the wonders of photography is that you don't need a professional teacher to teach you how to do it. It's not something that it's not the same as being a doctor. I would be very concerned if I had a doctor that learned entirely off of YouTube. But photography, there are so many resources out there between, people who are doing it for fun, people that are actually doing proper, like even if you check out like Adobe's YouTube channel, they just have tutorials and
Mhm.
stuff like that, have the resources available. So anyone starting photography can just go onto YouTube and kind of search up key terms like exposure triangle or these different types of things. And there's tutorials there. There's people there to explain it to you. You don't need to pay for a formal education to learn photography. So yes, on the one hand, I would say, comparing myself to my dad at that point, I definitely didn't have as much knowledge. But I think I was able to kind of go and use those resources from YouTube and kind of pull lesson plans together based off of that.
Mhm. Now, in terms of equipment, you talked about phones. That seems to be the go-to device for photography now, and the quality of phones has like, obviously increased significantly as the market has demanded. I still have a old megapixel for like 14 megapixel Sony camera in a drawer that I never use anymore, but it still seems to take better pictures than my 38 megapixel Samsung. So, what's the difference between a phone and a camera, even if it's not a crazy expensive camera?
hmm Now, honestly, when you get into it, there is a lot of technical details that you can get into comparing all of these things. But
Hmm.
I don't think we'll get too far into those, just because it is honestly at that point it starts to go over my head. I love the art form of photography. I love it. The technical details, I'm not as familiar with, and I'm I'm
Hmm.
not afraid to do that.
Hmm.
One thing I did as I was growing up and learning photography, one quote that Dad would always throw out was that the best camera the best camera to use is the one that you have on hand at the time. So if I'm out and
Hmm.
I'm, taking pictures somewhere and I don't have my big fancy camera, my 5D Mark II or whatever I'm using, and I only have my phone, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to take the picture.
Yeah.
A good photographer works with whatever they have on hand. And there used to be this, well, I'm not going to be able to remember the name now that I'm thinking about it, but there used to be this really cool YouTube series that wish I could remember the name of the channel, but I can't. But the basic was they would take these photographers
Hmm.
and they would give quite possibly the worst cameras they could think of. So there were some episodes where you'd have those little like Fisher Price cameras, or I remember there was one episode where it was actually a Barbie doll that like Mattel was making, and it just had a camera in her chest, and that was the whole thing. Was that kids were going around taking pictures with their Barbies. But the whole premise was that they would buy these incredibly terrible cameras and hand them to professional photographers. And you would see these professional photographers still succeeding to take pretty cool photos for what they were, because they had basics down of, composition and angles and how to create a photo, not just take a photo.
Yeah.
So I think that, of course, equipment is a huge, huge part of photography. But I think at the end of the day, too, there are these resources now that, if I only have my phone on me, I'm not going to take a picture.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the skills journey now. You said you did your first round of skills in junior high. So what was that first competition like, and what was it for? Was it just a regional in your city, or was it a provincial for Newfoundland?
Yeah. So the way that competitions in Newfoundland work, we're not a huge province as it is, so there's no regionals, provincials, nothing like that. It's all done in one. But the main key difference is that you'll do, if you're at the junior high level, you would do intermediates. If you win intermediates, you move on to provincials. If you win provincials, then you're moving on to nationals. So I started with intermediate competitions. And to be quite honest, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I just remember my teacher at the time had said, "Oh, there's this cool photography competition. Not quite sure what it is, but would you be interested in trying it?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?"
That sounds fun.
I think, I was like, why not? I'll try anything once. And I kind of went into it just, to have a bit of fun with it. And I remember being surprised when I placed gold. And at that point, I didn't even realize, but they said it during the award ceremony, was that like, "Oh, you've won now. You're moving on to provincials." I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know that was part of this deal." Okay. And I feel like that very first year of competing in Skills Canada was very much just like flying off the seat of my pants, because then I remember going on to provincials and I had practiced more, but still on to provincials, I had no idea that there was even a national competition on the table. It was once again, me sat in the awards ceremony and they played, if you've seen Skills Canada before, every year after nationals, they make this really cool video, which is just like summary of nationals. So they played it at our provincial competitions and were like, "This is what, people are moving on to." And I remember sitting in my seat and being like, "Oh my God, I hope I've won. That would be so cool." And I was like, "But there's no way I won. There's no way I won. Don't get that in your head. Don't get your hopes up. There's no way." I was like, "But that'd be so cool." And they called my name. And I was like, "Whoa." I'm blown.
So
Because
how
again,
how old are you at this point, winning provincials?
I would have been in 8th grade. So how old was she in 8th grade?
14.
Trying to do math. Yeah, 14, something like that. So I would have been
13
14.
even, yeah.
My birthday's in April. That would have been March. So yeah, I would have been like 13-ish years old. So
And
once again, didn't know what I was getting myself into, kind of just doing it for fun, 13, 14 years old. And my mind was blown. So yeah.
so who did you have for a mentor walking you through this skills process? It didn't sound like there was a lot of, I don't know, established skills presence in Newfoundland. Did you have someone to be with you the whole time and help you and train you?
Yeah, so here's the thing. The way Skills Canada Newfoundland operates is they do have an office with about, I think it's like, at that time, it probably would have been 5 employees. They're up to about 9 or 10 now. But what it would have been was other schools definitely had a lot of support. I think that my school, the one I was at, just hadn't really started getting into Skills Canada yet. So I had no idea what it was. My teacher didn't have much of an idea what it was. But even though we didn't quite know what we were getting ourselves into, I still remember feeling very, very supported every step along the way, because I had my teacher there, I had my dad there, who would have been my coach. And then when I came into when I won that provincial competition, and I was kind of introduced to this is what Team NL is, there was, so they had a photography committee. The man who was, chairing the committee at the time, our MTC, his name was Andrew. He was wonderful and kind of took me in and helped me do some lessons in it. And of course, then my dad was still a really huge part of it. He later went on, I think it was only like a year later that he joined the committee, because he is, again, parents screaming at the sidelines in a soccer game. Of course, he's going to become involved, especially once it's photography, something that he knows and loves. So then it was like, oh, how can I get involved in this too? So he became a PTC member not too long after that, and he still serves on it today, which would have been, we did the math not too long ago because our recent provincial competitions just happened. And as we were driving there that morning, we were kind of counting out on our fingers. Like, how long have we been at this? And I think it was like 9 years.
Jeez.
You're like, oh,
You started
whoa.
so young, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that I think that's one of the things that Newfoundland does that's so great. And I can't understand why other provinces don't do it. But it's those intermediate competitions.
Probably
because,
just
again,
too many people. It'd probably just be too many kids.
That's the thing too, because I know that other provinces have to do, regional competitions. Meanwhile, we're not necessarily doing that. We're just going intermediates, provincials, moving on. But I think the junior high level competitions have been such a benefit, not only to me, but to everyone else who's competed in them. I've had so many friends who have essentially grown up with Skills Canada just based off the nature of starting in junior high and then competing all the way up until you're graduating. Yeah. So I think that's a really cool aspect of it.
So after you went to nationals, how did you place in nationals? How'd you do?
So my very first national competitions, I placed 4th, and I continued.
And where was that one?
That would have been Saskatchewan. So familiar, Saskatoon.
Saskatoon, yep.
Yeah. So that was my very first, Skills Canada national competition. And once again, I was just mind blown. I was like, it's crazy. This is so cool. I had never, being from Newfoundland, I don't even think I'd been to anything that big before. Like if you've been to a Skills Canada competition, just the scale of the venue and photography. I've always considered myself lucky in this realm because I've had some friends who've competed in stuff like animation. And animation is very much so you sit at your desk, do your project, and you're into the competition, but you don't really leave your desk. Photography, I always really liked it because what you were doing was part of your task was to go around the whole venue and just take pictures, like documentary style photos of the whole venue, everything that was happening that day, which is huge.
Yeah.
So I just remember walking around and being like, whoa, trying to capture everything I could because I was just so enamored by it all.
Yeah. And because you're so young, your first round of nationals isn't your last. You still have more. So did you go back and do another round of provincials and then another round of nationals?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would have been 2015 that I first started. 2016, I competed, but I didn't make it to nationals. So I did provincials. But then 2017, 2018, 2019, I did national competitions again. So that would have been 4 years of competing nationally.
And how'd you do in your last round of nationals?
My very last round of nationals, I finally placed on the podium after 3 years of getting 4th in a row, or 1/5, I think. But I was always very close. that final year that I had, I placed bronze at the podium, and that was such a great moment because that was what I had been working for.
And then what happens? So you work all these years, and you get to the podium. And at some point you age out and your kind of time with the competition's done. Most skills competitors just pull the pin. They're off to work now in their trade or whether it is a follow-up education aligned with their trade. For yourself, what was the plan? You finished nationals, now what?
Well, to be fair, I actually did try to compete again because the nice thing about photography is that it moves on to the post-secondary level. So I did try to compete again. But if you're following the timeline here, I went 2017, 2018, 2019,
COVID.
Then 2020. So we all know what happened in 2020. So I didn't compete in 2020. Obviously, nobody did. But the really great thing at this point was that 2020, the pandemic hit. Nobody quite knew what they were doing. And Skills Canada Newfoundland actually reached out to me and said, hey, we're actually looking to hire someone on as a youth programs coordinator, because at this point, everything had just been thrown virtual. Nobody knew what was happening. And they said, we kind of need someone to come in here and be able to take what we have and pivot it virtually. And of course, I was going to take that offer. Why wouldn't I? I had worked with them previously on a Canada Summer Jobs Grant doing some similar youth programs coordinator stuff. But, of course, I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to work with an organization that essentially raised me. So I took that opportunity again for, I think it was about a year and a half I worked doing youth programs coordinator. So I made a bunch of, different virtual videos and competitions for kids to compete in while, the whole world was shut down, and did a bunch of different programming and a bunch of that cool stuff. And yeah, so I got the opportunity to work with them in that realm, which I really, really enjoyed.
Now, at this point, you're working with Skills. Is photography a hobby or is photography a job?
Photography is definitely a hobby of mine. I know a lot of people who've, done these competitions might go on to do photography full time. I don't think that was ever quite in the cards for me. I think I always knew I liked photography. I liked the arts. I liked all of this stuff, but it wasn't something that I was going to go and do completely on my own full time. So right now what I'm doing is I'm currently a business student at Memorial University of Newfoundland. And a lot of what I'm doing is kind of focusing myself towards a degree in digital marketing kind of things, which honestly does include more photography than I expected, because a lot of times people hear marketing, and when you're working with a smaller company, if they know you have photography background, they'll just say, hey, okay, we have an event coming up. Here you go.
Yeah.
So just this past weekend, I spent doing photos for an event that I was hosting through a job that I'm doing that I kind of got into because of business, like a digital marketing role. So I spent the whole weekend doing something I love, even though it wasn't necessarily what I had planned to do. It's still very much a part of what I'm doing.
It's very interesting you say that. Literally, one of our graphic designers at the CWB, Christine Mark, she's amazing, is a professional photographer on the side. So guess who gets tagged in to do all the professional photography for all our conferences? And she loves it.
There you go.
Because then, normally she works at a desk as a graphic designer and doesn't need to go anywhere. But as a photographer, she gets flown all over the country, all over North America to be our photographer. So pretty nice little shtick on the side,
It is. I gotta say, because it is kind of nice. There are lots of times that I've, been working with organizations, and it is very much so. You're at your desk doing a lot of this planning, but then you come to an event, and instead of, running some of the back end, then I'm actually on the floor taking pictures, which I think definitely highlights both. But I think that it's so cool that I get to take something that I grew up doing and I love doing, and now I get to apply it into my big kid job.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you're studying commerce and working your way towards digital marketing, which is a great career, I know we're I think hiring one right now, trying to hire right now.
Here we go.
Check our website. We got lots. I think I offered the last interview from Skills a job too, so I got to watch what I do here.
You're gonna have the whole National Alumni Committee working for you guys very soon.
But how much of the skills that you picked up in the process of learning photography and then working your way through the skills competitions, how much of those skills are applicable now in your field of studying commerce and digital marketing?
I think the skills I gained through doing like Skills Canada competitions don't just apply to photography. They don't just apply to commerce. They apply to life as like a whole. I think that so many things I picked up through doing Skills Canada are things that, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. Even things like I am sat here doing a podcast with you today. If you told me this was something I would do back when I was first starting, like if you looked at me in grade 7, I'd say, nope, I have a fear of public speaking. I hate it. Not happening. I think that's something through growing up and doing Skills Canada, it like hauled me out of my shell. I had no choice in the matter. And I think like that was one of the main things I took from it was, becoming more of I won't say an extrovert because I'm not quite there, but, being able to come out of my shell and be more confident in a lot of these things because I definitely wasn't before. And, being able to take those skills that I've learned, so the confidence, the like speaking, communication skills, a lot of this stuff, and being able to apply that to my degree has been, absolutely so important.
Yeah. And then what about some of the practical skills? You talked about setting up a shot, composition, understanding frame, understanding environment. I feel like those are all skills that also translate into the world of commerce very well too.
Yeah, absolutely. So like a lot of what I'm doing now with my current digital marketing role is kind of like making posters for events and making graphics and, advertising and reaching out to people in that kind of way. And I think a lot of it comes back to that, photography aspect of it. So when I was doing photography, you would have been setting up your shot. It's not quite the same, but I think there definitely are ties between what I'm doing now and, creating these kind of graphics and what I would have been doing then, which would have been, setting up compositions. And same thing when it comes to the communication aspect of it. So through learning photography, some of the stuff we would have done was like, talking with someone you're taking a picture of. Again, I used to be very shy. I wouldn't have ever communicated like that or walked up to someone and said, "Hey, you look cool. Let me take your picture." But I think as I've grown and kind of gotten into this, I think that is absolutely something now I'd be confident in doing, running up to someone and saying, "Oh, let me take a picture. You look very cool." That communication aspect of it. And I think that then comes back into the digital marketing when it comes to advertising, reaching out to people, like that kind of realm. So even though they don't connect, it's not a straight line. It's definitely a bit of a curvy path,
Mm-hmm.
but that they definitely connect. And it's definitely these transferable skills I've taken from doing photography and then applying them into my marketing roles today.
Awesome. Now, what are your duties now with Skills? You're on the alumni committee. What do you what does that do? What kind of work do you do with that on a volunteer basis now? Working for Skills.
Yeah, so now I'm not officially working with them anymore. I did do youth program coordinator roles in the past, and they took me on for one of my commerce work terms as a marketing and communications student, which was great. But now I've moved on from the professional working, and now I'm doing volunteer work with the Alumni Association. So I went from being alumni vice president to alumni president, which is what I'm doing now. And a lot of that includes working with past competitors and current competitors. So right now we just finished our provincial competitions. And a lot of that role for me was on the day of, I ran a booth. So the booth was essentially me sat in the gym where a lot of students and school tours were coming through. And I was doing interviews with past alumni. And then at the same time, we were switching and doing some like hands-on try-trades for students that were coming through. And it gave me the opportunity to talk with a lot of the students that were there and kind of tell them about my journey with Skills Canada and what I was doing. And then another big part of my role as alumni president, well, it wasn't supposed to be my role, but as I mentioned earlier, there was a huge snowstorm recently. And unfortunately, that shut down our provincial competitions, which is an absolute bummer.
Oh, scary.
But I was told that's the first time it's actually happened in all of the years, that apparently that was the first time snow ever shut us down. We've been shut down for COVID. We were once shut down for a fire, but apparently that was our first time being shut down for snow.
Must have been a lot of snow.
Yeah. So we got through half of the day, but then things shut down before the awards ceremony. So we pivoted to a virtual setting, which was, everything's been virtual. It's not something anyone was.
It's not a big deal anymore.
Yeah, it's not a big deal anymore. But I actually got to host the awards ceremony. So I got to be the one announcing all of the medalists and, welcoming them onto the new Team NL. And then coming up in the near future, hopefully we'll be doing team meetings and getting everyone excited and ready for nationals. So now really my role is just to be as involved with the current competitors and the past competitors as I can be.
Are you excited to get to Winnipeg and see everybody again?
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be out there too, doing more podcasts, and I'll be working the CWB booth. We're a sponsor for Skills.
Oh, well, I'll have to swing by and say hello. Definitely.
Well, I think we're planning a big go out for everybody that's been working on the podcast too, and maybe get everybody out for a supper or something. It'd be fun, right?
Oh, that'll be wicked. Yeah, I'm excited for that then.
Awesome. Now, to wrap up the interview, first of all, in terms of your experience from day one, grade 7 to now, what would be something that motivated you? What was a motivating factor throughout that entire journey that made you stick with it instead of just saying, that's enough? Especially your unique position where you went through the process several times. At any point, you could have been like, no, that's enough. What kept you in it?
I think so. Okay, I'll use the example that my very first year of nationals, I went to Saskatchewan. I placed 4th. I had such an amazing time. And then the next year, I completely flopped. I didn't make it past the intermediate competitions. I just had a bad day at competitions. I had a bad day competing. And, I don't even think I medaled that year. So I went from 4th nationally to the bottom of even St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that there was definitely a bit of like, yeah, should I even be doing this? Like, that's a bit of a, fall.
Yeah.
But I think what kept me motivated was just thinking about all, like, everything I had learned from Skills Canada and everything I had taken from the experience and the friends that I had made who were still going and competing that year. And I just remember, like, I lost and it sucked and it, felt so bad for a bit. But then it was just, okay, and we're turning it around. And next year I'm going to be on that podium. Mark my words. So it's like, I'm doing everything in my power to get back to where I was, because Skills Canada really, really helped me that first year. And I was like, it's something I still wanted to be a part of. I wasn't done my journey and I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just, how can I get myself back to where I was? So then that year was a lot of practice, and I kept going to photography club and I kept training. And then, the next year I made it to the podium and I went to nationals 3 more times before I was done. So I think that even though I might have been motivated to give it up that year, I think it was definitely everything that Skills taught me in that first year that carried me on for the rest of it.
Awesome. And for anyone who's listening to your story right now, who's interested in photography, what would be a couple simple first steps for them, to say, hey, this is how a good way to get started in this path?
Again, like I said earlier, for photography, you don't need a formal education. If you have an interest in it, go and hit YouTube. YouTube is your best resource. There are, you could go to your local college and learn photography, but you can learn it from the best experts in the world who are doing actual videos and, like web series on how to do all of the same things. So if you have the ability, why wouldn't you just start now? So if you're really interested in it, head to YouTube, Google some of those key terms like exposure triangle and composition and all of those types of things. And you can teach them to yourself, really, to get a start in it. And whether you're, I think anyone's first experience with photography at this point would have been probably their phone.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's taken a picture and, held up their phone and click, and that's all you do. But there's so many more layers you can add just to that, even just a simple phone picture, to think about what's your composition, how are you setting it up, what's the framing, what's in the photo, what are we including, what are we excluding, should I be a lower angle or higher angle? There's so many, if you're focusing on it, there are so many different aspects to control into what goes into a photo. So even if you have an interest and you just want to start, take your iPhone and, pay more attention to what you're doing, almost, not like put the thought behind it instead of just blindly holding up the phone and taking a picture. Think, why am I taking this picture?
Yeah.
The one I used to hear it referred to was, you're not just taking the photo, you're creating the photo. There's a big difference between the two. So kind of taking that mindset and applying it to what you're doing now. And I think that'll help you along the way of learning.
Like, I slide my phone settings over to the pro section and I get scared. I'm like, ooh, what are all these weird things? And I even took a photography class. Like, I even know what ISO and f-stops are. I'm still like, oh, like
scary. Yeah, and it definitely is scary at first. And one thing I was told when I was learning is that your photos get worse before they get better. Because if you're shooting with a digital camera, generally what you're doing is you're shooting on auto. But once you start going into this class and you're learning about the f-stops and your ISO and your shutter speed and all of that, then you start to play with it. And once you flip that camera onto manual and you're playing with it yourself, it's no longer the camera telling you what to do. You're telling it what to do. Then, of course, your photos get a lot worse before you start to learn what you're doing. But you got to do it to learn. You're going to get worse before you get better. And once you start to get better, you definitely see the difference from what you've been doing in auto, because you can control what's happening in photo.
Awesome.
But it is kind of that progress. So yeah, keep that in mind if you're going to start learning. It will get worse, but we all get there eventually.
All right, Allie, this has been fantastic. Any shout outs for any of your friends or mentors? Anybody you want to say hi to?
Well, first of all, huge shout out to Skills Canada, Newfoundland, Labrador. I would not be where I am today without all of their help and everything that they've helped me through. And then I guess otherwise it just goes back to my dad, who I keep shouting out, because he's really the one that started all of this. So, Trevor Wright Photography, check him out.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Allie. And I hope you had fun on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.
Awesome. And for all the people that have been following the series, this has been really fun. We're not done. We're going coast to coast to coast, catching all the people and all different levels. And we're going to finish up doing the recordings in Winnipeg at the National Skills Competition, which if you haven't ever been to a National Skills Competition, go check them out. They're extremely impressive. They're very, very fun. And even if you want to just help volunteer at the local, regional, or provincial level, they're always looking for help. And companies, if you want to support, they're always looking for sponsors. So if you are out there and you're listening, share, download, and like, and keep following our series. And I'll catch you at the next episode. So stay tuned.
We hope you enjoyed the show.